What role did Richard Bushman play in the creation of Mormon studies as an academic field? Few figures have been as influential in Mormon academia as Richard Bushman. His book, Rough Stone Rolling, A Cultural Biography of Joseph Smith, was a classic in the field and set the terms for much of the work that has come later. He was the inaugural holder of the Howard W. Hunter Chair of Mormon Studies at Claremont Graduate University, and now the Mormon Studies Chair that is housed at the University of Virginia's Department of Religious Studies is named in his honor. Last week, I did a video on a brand new biography of Bushman, J.B. Hawes's Richard Lyman Bushman, a Mormon Ambassador, published last week by University of Illinois Press. I even interviewed Richard Bushman, the topic himself, asking him what it felt like to be not just a biographer, but now the subject of a biography. And in that video, I focused on his life and his thought. But I still had a lot more to say about his academic impact, which I'm going to cover in today's video. So today, here are my goals. I want to follow along Richard Bushman's academic career and why it's relevant to the development of Mormon studies. I'll explain his major contributions to the field, especially in the last few decades. And then I'll interview Dr. Laurie Maffly-Kipp, who currently holds the Richard Lyman Bushman Chair of Mormon Studies at the University of Virginia. And then I'll conclude with some general thoughts on Bushman's legacy and impact. That's a lot to cover, so let's dive in. When I was a young Mormon entering the field of academia with some interest in talking about Mormon history at some point, I was told that the best model to follow was what was called the Bushman Model, which meant dedicating your career and building your establishment in a field outside of Mormonism, and then taking that expertise and reflecting on the Mormon field. And a key assumption in that idea was that you were not able to gain academic credibility by solely working on Mormonism. And that generally plays out in Bushman's own career for reasons I'll highlight before. So for instance, his Rough Stone Rolling was not his first biography of Joe Smith. He had published the first part, Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism, back in the early 1980s. And when he was hired at the University of Delaware to hold an endowed chair and also chair their department, he once told the person hiring him, an anecdote that he shared many times, where he basically said, you know, I have this book on Joseph Smith that also came out that goes alongside my colonial American stuff. And the University of Delaware administrator said, yes, we know, Richard, and we're hiring you despite that, which goes to show the general assumption or doubt that people had toward Mormon studies. But even if Bushman didn't come around to focusing on Mormonism until his later life, his entire career at least dabbled in it. It maintained an interest. He wrote his senior thesis at Harvard on the Mormon-Missouri conflict while he taught at BYU for a decade after his PhD. He wrote essays on Joseph Smith and early Mormonism, including his compelling historiographical manifesto, Faithful History, published by Dialogue in the late 1960s. I'll link to it in the video description. It really outlines his view to use his faith to understand history and his history to build faith in an academic way, not a lazy apologetic way. And during the 1970s, when Leonard Arrington became the church historian and he envisioned this multi-volume project on church history to be published for the church's 150th anniversary in 1980, he tapped Richard Bushman to write that first volume. That's what eventually became the Joseph Smith and the Beginning of Mormonism. But it was also that manuscript, when it went out for review with the ecclesiastical leaders, still part of the church's own official published history, that caused problems. You can go back and watch my previous video where I talk about how this 16-volume series ended up falling apart due to ecclesiastical leaders not buying Leonard Arrington's vision. And it was when they were reading Richard Bushman's volume that they concluded that was the case. The book was also a bit of an odd duck among other academics, as seen in the anecdote with his University of Delaware colleague. In other words, it's not going to be until a couple decades later, after Richard Bushman was much more accomplished, which is hard saying something. He had already won the Bancroft Prize, which is the highest honor given to an American historian for his previous work. But it's not until his Rough Stone Rolling that academic credibility started bleeding into the Mormon studies space. Before I go much further, just a reminder that if you enjoy this kind of nerdy content in which I provide historical context for our present day, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I do deep dives on topics every Monday, I connect the past to the present on Wednesdays, and on Fridays I peel back the curtains on the historian's craft when we talk about how history is done. I interview authors, I look at books, we dissect sources together so that you too can have the tools to make historical assessments. If you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have chosen to support this channel and make it possible for both me and my producer Anthony to dedicate time to these videos, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee you get early access to the videos, you get little icons next to your name when you leave comments, and most importantly, you feel good about supporting public-facing, rigorous scholarship. I also recommend subscribing to my free Kit newsletter, where I send out links and videos and updates and announcements. And also you can follow me on my social media platforms, especially Instagram, where I provide supplemental information. But that's enough business. Let's get back to Bushman. Now, as touched on in last Friday's video and briefly mentioned already today, Bushman had a very successful academic career. He received his PhD from Harvard, taught at BYU for a decade, and then for his first book, From Puritan to Yankee, A Social History of the Evolution of New England, he received the Bancroft Prize in 1967, the best award given to American historians. From that time, he was recruited to Boston University, then he was recruited to the University of Delaware, and then he was recruited to Columbia University, where he held the Gouverneur Morris Chair of American History and published what many scholars see as his best book, The Refinement of America, a field-defining social and cultural history that captures what history was lived like. And it was only after that point that he was tapped by Ron Esplin, who was directing the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute of Mormon History and Culture back at BYU, that we'd really love for you to flesh out your Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism book and write a broader biography. And that was the origins of Rough Stone Rolling, which Bushman recognized was going to be significant, in part because Joseph Smith's 200th anniversary was coming up on 2005, the big bicentennial that was going to have a lot of news. Bushman always has an ear for what's going to be relevant. But more so, he recognized the cultural impact. Because remember, this is in the wake of the September 6th disciplines in the early 1990s, when a number of church intellectuals and historians were punished, and there was a general thaw on the academic enterprise. And Bushman wanted to help salvage both how the church is interpreted by outside the world, but also by scholars within Mormonism, showing that you can do both. You can be both loyal to the church, and you can also do quality work. So he wanted church buy-in before he really went full throttle on the Joseph Smith biography. He arranged to get access to the key sources at the church archives. He helped organize the Joseph Smith Papers Project, which probably is one of the most important projects in modern Mormonism. And he also got buy-in to establish a summer seminar held at BYU every summer, where he would take some of the best young scholars interested in Mormon studies, and they would spend several weeks digging into Joseph Smith's life and culture. And that seminar is far more significant than its limited cultural memory might imply, because those seminars held every summer at BYU from about, I think 1997 was the first year, and then that was going up until just about a decade ago. He would try to model from young academics that you could safely engage Mormon history in a way that's academically rigorous, but also not, upset the church if you do it right, while also teaching the church to respond more generously to academia. This is coming after what many scholars call the lost generation, where there's about a decade in the late 80s and 90s where lots of Latter-day Saints were going to grad school and decided they didn't want to work on Mormonism because they saw it as too tense. And so this trained a new generation, and many of the most important figures in the Mormon studies field now are veterans of that summer seminar, whether it be Matt Bowman and Patrick Mason, who hold Mormon Studies chairs, Matt Groh, who is the director of the church history division in Salt Lake City, Steve Harper, who is the editor of the BYU Studies, and then there's a lot of women historians who studied with Richard's wife Claudia when she ran a summer seminar as well, people like Christine Haglund or Melissa Inouye or Amy Hoyt and all these other great scholars. And then, of course, that culminates in the publication in 2005 of Richard Bushman's Rough Stone Rolling, a cultural biography of Joseph Smith, Mormonism's founder, which really helped cause a reckoning for the LDS Church. Now, as I mentioned in the video last week, I don't have as rosy a depiction as J.B. Hawes does in the biography. I don't think it solved all problems. I wish it remade the modern historical consciousness within Mormonism in the shape of Bushman. I don't think it was that successful, but it really did cause a reckoning and a wrestling that really lasts until today. It also prompted these robust conversations where the broader academia saw that you could do important topics on Mormon studies, which is why we've seen a number of academics, like Dr. Laurie Maffly-Kipp, who I'll be talking to in a bit, who see as credible digging into the world of Mormon studies. So in other words, Bushman's work both made Mormon studies scholarship a bit more palatable to the LDS Church, while also more credible to academia. That's what I think J.B. Hawes meant when he called Richard Bushman an ambassador. But perhaps the best legacy of that ambassador work was Bushman's work to cement what we call academic endowed chairs. Now, Bushman himself held these academic endowed chairs both at the University of Delaware and at Columbia University. These are where donors donated enough money to endow a position that an academic will hold. These are the highest type of positions that you will find at those institutions. And over the last 2 decades, we have seen several universities host endowed chairs in Mormon studies. Now, both sides get a lot out of this. The Latter-day Saint community get a lot out of it because you get academic prestige for that topic. The universities get a lot out of it because they get a prestigious appointment where they can hire a senior scholar and their salary is covered. But from the perspective of someone like Richard Bushman, these endowed chairs, as he's frequently said, mean a permanent seat at the academic table, that the ideas coming out of Mormon studies have to be taken seriously. The first endowed chair was done at Utah State University and appropriately was named after Leonard Arrington. But then the second one was at Claremont Graduate University. So this is going to be the first one outside the Mormon corridor. And Bushman ended up being the first person to hold that position. And he did so after being retired for nearly a decade. And he agreed to take it on for 2 years to help raise more money, solidify its impact, and then make it possible for the following chair holders, first Patrick Mason and then Matthew Bowman, to do phenomenal work there. And so a few years later, when the University of Virginia announced that they were going to have a Mormon Studies chair, the donors who created it, as well as the university, named it after Richard Bushman himself. That's why at the University of Virginia, in their religious studies department, one of the best religious studies departments across all public universities, they have a Mormon Studies chair named after Richard Bushman. You can also find Mormon Studies chairs, by the way, at Graduate Theological Union, right now held by Deidre Green, as well as the University of Utah, held by Paul Reeve. These are really the lasting legacy of Bushman's attempt to blend the Mormon studies world and academia, while also having stakeholders from the general public. But to learn more about that, I think we need to talk with the current chairholder. Dr. Laurie Maffly-Kipp is one of the most respected scholars in American religious history. Within the world of Mormon studies, she's probably one of the most important scholars who comes from outside Mormonism. She has never been Latter-day Saint, but she respects the tradition, and she brings in academic rigor to help understand it. She received her PhD from Yale University, taught for 2 decades at the University of North Carolina, another nation-leading religious studies department. She held an endowed chair in religion and politics at the Washington University in St. Louis, and then she moved to the University of Virginia a year ago to become the Richard Lyman Bushman Chair of Mormon Studies. She's authored and edited several important books, including Religion and Society in Frontier America, Setting Down the Sacred Past, African American Race Histories, and she has edited the Penguin Classic edition of the Book of Mormon, an example of trying to explain Mormonism to a broader world. She's also been a leader in the field, serving as president for both the American Society of Church History and as president of the Mormon History Association. She's received the prestigious Pennington Award from the University of Heidelberg in Germany for her scholarship, and next year she will be the Harmsworth Visiting Professor of American History at Oxford University, one of the most prestigious and respected academic appointments you can have in academia. And I'm so grateful she was willing to spend a few minutes with me, so let's get to that conversation. And we are now very lucky to be joined by Dr. Laurie Maffly-Kipp, the holder of the Richard Bushman Chair of Mormon Studies at the University of Virginia. Now, Dr. Maffly-Kipp, Mormon Studies was not your first topic that you explored. You are already an established scholar of American religion. So what led you to have an interest in the Mormon culture?
Well, it actually started, I think, with my teaching and interest generally in religion in the American West, which is where I did start my career. I was teaching in a religious studies department. So all religious studies departments study all sorts of religions. So Mormonism, it made sense to have that sort of be one of the things that we're covering, and especially, for someone interested in Western phenomena. So I was asked to give a talk at the Mormon Studies, the Mormon History Association meeting in 1999, I think it was. And in preparation for that, I decided, I better teach a class on Mormonism because I didn't know as much as I wanted to know. So I taught a small seminar. This was at University of North Carolina with a lot of evangelical students who knew that they hated Mormons. They just wanted to know why and thought that they were going to learn that from my class, when in fact, what we all learned was just a lot about what's true, what's false, where the stereotypes are about Mormons. And I think it gave the students and me a much more sort of well-rounded understanding of how the religion has been lived out over time. So I just started teaching this course more and more because it was so much fun. And then I just got pulled in little by little to do more research.
They eventually get you. For some people, it's the guys with the white t-shirts and name tags. For the others, it's the academics with their books and articles.
Well, and it was also all the people around me who, the church members who were so gracious about coming to my class, about explaining their beliefs and really making themselves in very generous ways vulnerable to the questions of these 20-year-old students who just wanted to get them at first, but it opened up into something else.
Yeah, and your perspective on teaching that course touches on a key lesson that I think most people are surprised to learn about how the academic study of Mormonism, or what we call Mormon Studies, differs from what they might encounter in a Sunday school class or an anti-Mormon Reddit thread or an evangelical documentary. So how would you define what makes something Mormon Studies scholarship, and how is that different from other ways of studying a religion?
Yeah, well, it can mean a lot of different things. I think, as I said, being in a religious studies program, a lot of students come into our classes, all of our classes, thinking, oh, this is going to be kind of like going to Sunday school, or I'm going to do the same sorts of things. But I try to tell them sort of right up front that this isn't a matter of evaluating and debating truth claims. That's not why we're here. We're here to understand the way religions of various sorts work in our world, the ways that they have shaped our institutions, our understandings, the events around us. And that's just as true for Mormonism as anything else. How does art or architecture or music or economics fit into sort of an understanding of this religious tradition? And how did that religious tradition shape the ways that believers and non-believers have sort of understood the world? So I think, getting them around the truth claims, and not to say those aren't important. Of course, they're very important, but that's not the kind of exercise that I try to teach students to do in class.
Yeah. And now when you're teaching those courses, you're doing so as the holder of the Richard Bushman Chair of Mormon Studies, which seems to signify that Richard Bushman has had an important place in how these things are studied. So of course, one of the reasons we're doing this video is this brand new brief biography that came out in Bushman, which is, prompting more reassessment. So as the holder of the Bushman Chair, where do you see Bushman fitting into this larger disciplinary evolution of taking Mormonism seriously and interpreting it on academic grounds?
Right. That's a great question. I've had a chance to sort of look over the biography a little bit, and clearly the focus of it is on his work in Mormon Studies, but that's not the first way I encountered his work at all. In fact, he came years ago when I was just beginning my career. He came to Duke University, right down the street from me, and gave a talk about his work on gentility and refinement, and he was just about to publish that book. And so I came to know him just as a brilliant scholar, and as someone who could take very complicated ideas and distill them effectively, which is what every historian dreams of doing, and he does it so well. So I see him as as just a leader in sort of the field of excellent scholarship. He has obviously turned his sights to Mormon studies and Mormon history in particular in ways that he wants it to appeal to both believers and non-believers. And that's an important role to play, to say we're not, that my job as a historian is not to convince you that this is right or wrong. My role is to sort of give you my interpretation of what happened. Sometimes that's from the perspective of the believers themselves. Sometimes it's from outsider perspectives. But he's done all that with such grace and brilliance over the years that I'm proud to have the chair that honors him.
So as part of holding the chairs, you're running the Mormon Studies program at the University of Virginia. The second person to do so after the phenomenal Kathleen Flake, who has also been a very impactful scholar in the field. What types of things does that program entail? What type of work do you produce, and the goals that you have with that program?
Yeah, it's, I'm just getting started. So I will tell you, this is the end of my second year. And parts of it are things that we're already well in formation. For example, probably the best part of that are the library fellowships and collection. We have Greg Prince gave over 11,000 items to our library. And so we've been able to fund library fellowships for people to come and use those resources. We're also still collecting resources and are adding to that. So that's sort of being the curator of that and the sort of the advertiser of that is a really important piece of what we do. But I teach courses, undergrad and grad courses in Mormonism every year. We have an annual lecture series, the Joseph Smith Lecture, where we bring in sometimes someone who is a church member. We had Dallin Oaks here not too many years ago. We've had people from outside the tradition who are sort of speaking in some ways to the kinds of the interests of the community. But I see what I've tried to start developing is because of my own interests in the global church and the reach of Mormonism as an international phenomenon, seeing the importance of doing that in Virginia, in a place, in a university where a lot of our students end up going into public policy, end up going into governmental work or NGOs. Having that proximity to Washington, D.C. is, I think, a strength here that I'm sort of finding ways to sort of build up and work with. So we have sort of people in Washington who are going to be coming through here and talking about their work in the fields and talking about the ways that the church relates internationally. So the global piece is really important to me. We also have a podcast, Scholars and Saints, that's been, we try to get people who have written books or writing books that have just come out in on sort of what's going on. And finally, if I can just mention one more thing, we have a fellows program that I'm just getting started that is named in honor of Lester Bush and Yvonne Snow Bush. Lester Bush was twice a graduate of UVA, both undergraduate and medical school, and Yvonne, his wife, was a Charlottesville native, born and raised. And so I see tying the way that he did work on race in the Mormon Church, the ways that we can tie that into larger conversations about sometimes issues that are difficult for people to talk about is really important to me.
Yeah, I'm excited about all of that. those who watch my channel know I did a video on Lester Bush's classic article on Mormonism and the
Mm-hmm.
Negro Doctrine. It's vast impact. Like few academic articles get that big of a cultural impact, which it kind of sets an unreasonable expectation. I don't know if you know this, Laurie, but I served my LDS mission in DC, French speaking, working with the international community. So I'm thrilled to hear all of that international component. I think that's brilliant. And of course, you know, serving in DC, nearly every member I spoke to worked with the government in some way.
Yes.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. And finally, when you talk about the library holdings, many people who view my videos know that I'm often referencing these digital sources held at the UVA Mormon Studies collection, because the program has done a phenomenal job digitizing and making available so many sources that really democratize the access and analysis, which is just absolutely phenomenal. So besides doing all of that, I'm sure you're also trying to carve out some space for your own scholarship. So why don't you talk about what you're doing, building on your previous great work?
Thank you. Well, I have an edited collection coming out this fall from University of Illinois Press on Mormonisms in Asia, in conjunction with my late colleague, Melissa Inoue, in which we try to explore, we take different sites around Asia, from the Philippines to China to India, and try to sort of come up with to raise some of the issues that we think come out of those particular environments within church history. And that sort of is one piece of the work I've been doing on the global church as a whole. And that's been a long time in the making, but I'm hoping with some time off next year, I'll be able to get that done. But it'll cover a lot of different settings around the world, from the South Pacific to Asia to Europe to West Africa. So
and you've already dropped a few breadcrumbs in various publications to make all of us very excited and know that it's going to be groundbreaking and brilliant. So thank you again, Dr. Maffly-Kipp, for spending some time and talking about this important material.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Dr. Maffly-Kipp for talking with me about Mormon studies as a field and Richard Bushman's impact, and getting a taste on some of her important scholarship. I hope this video makes clear how Richard Bushman's career is a story of Mormon studies growing as a field. If Leonard Arrington is often defined as the dean of what we call New Mormon history, a topic I've covered in previous videos, Richard Bushman can probably be seen as one of the deans of Mormon studies, moving the field to be more interdisciplinary, integrated in academia, and devoted to questions beyond the true-false binary. And I'll close with perhaps a textual example of that type of work, which was his book that came out just a few years ago on Joseph Smith's Gold Plates, A Culture History, a very interdisciplinary volume that took the gold plate story seriously on its own, but also placed it in a much wider context of other sacred records from groups, an example of the type of work that's possible in the religious studies field, making the story relevant for those outside the LDS corridor. And the fact that he published this groundbreaking interdisciplinary work at the age of 92, the time when most scholars are either not producing any work or are just curmudgeons and bemoaning the way that academia has gone, he reflects the very generous and inquisitive mind that has really been crucial to his success. So even when I differ from Bushman in interpretations and even some approaches in some ways, that's probably to my detriment. Rough Stone Rolling, perhaps more than any other book, shaped my interest in Mormonism, as I know it has for many others, and it's on his shoulders that the Mormon studies field now stands. I hope this video helps make sense, not just about Bushman's academic career, but what Mormon studies as an academic discipline aims to do. Thanks again to Dr. Laurie Maffly-Kipp for sharing some time. Thanks to J.B. Hawes for writing the book that prompted this discussion, and for Richard Bushman for giving the example. History has never been more relevant than it is today, and Bushman's life is a great example of that.